in the chat. Any particular questions? Hello, Zoe, that you might have for Isabel, because Isabel will be needing to leave after about half an hour or so. So if you do have any burning questions for Isabel, we'll make some time for that, but also put them into the chat as moving through. The whole session is set up as part of the UK and Ireland Prime working group tour, where every month we're hosting a session with the different working group leads as part of Prime Global, in order to showcase the fabulous opportunities that are available through the different working groups that are all detailed on the Prime Global website, and indeed on the Prime UK and Ireland website. And by becoming part of that community, as you will hear from Isabel today, it gives you access to a great global network of educators, careers professionals, all sorts of other people in those networks. And for Isabel's in particular, the business community, because of coaching and everything that Isabel has been doing in this space for over 10 years. She is a shining star of how to lead a exemplary working group. So we're most honoured to have you with us today, and then following on with a couple of great educators, researchers from the UKI community that are using the sustainability mindset principles. Barbara and Orla have joined us, and they'll be telling everyone about their projects as an example of how the sustainability mindset principles can be used in practice. So with that, over to you, Isabel.
Okay, thank you so much for organizing this, Karen, and the team. And it's a pleasure to be and meet with you here. Maybe while what you were saying, Karen, about this working group is the core theme of this meeting today, I was thinking, but in the back of my mind, if I would be new to it, I would say, but why would I care about the mindset? And so while other working groups about climate change are very obvious, or poverty or whatever, so in this particular topic that is not so well known maybe, or where we have some assumptions about what it is, I thought it would be important to start maybe with a short story about how I came up on this. Obviously, I was not looking for a mindset. My first background is I am a psychologist and a therapist, and as such, I'm always interested in the causes. Why is someone behaving in one way, acting in this way, etc. And that was part of my first motivation when back in 2003, 2004, I started to ask myself, why are there some business leaders that are acting in a way that is not conventional, who are, without anyone asking them to do so, they are thinking, how could we do lower our impact, do less harm. That was the way they called it at that time, do less harm on the community or on the environment. And I was wondering, why were they concerned with that? Because that was not mainstream, and they were not, and these were not philanthropic organizations. These were leaders, business leaders in conventional business, not mostly multinational. So I started to be more interested on a personal side. Through my own midlife crisis, I was asking, what is the difference I am making? Why am I doing? Do I have this profession? At the time I was a coach. And I said, why am I doing this? Yes, so people can work better and go along with one another and their teams. But there was something missing. And as it always is, part of your own journey becomes then an arena to serve or to work with others. And for me, it was seeking that answer. Why am I doing? What is the difference I am making, or I would like to make? That reshuffled the pieces on my board but also gave me the fuel to start this research about why certain business leaders are doing things that are not expected. No one asked them to do it, and however, they are trying to turn the corporation upside down to do less harm. And I will tell you a story about the less harm in a moment. So jumping ahead some years, what I did is I interviewed business leaders that met those criteria. Basically, I wanted to understand what information they had or what motivated them to see if there was something that we could teach, that we could intentionally develop, because I think maybe they knew something and we just start teaching that, and then we will have other future leaders or professionals that will act in this more responsible, maybe, or more sustainable or more compassionate ways. So surprise one is that it was not something that can actually be taught, but rather something that can be developed. Because I found in these along these very long conversations that there was something that had shifted in how they looked into the world. We can call it a way of thinking. We can call it a paradigm. We can call it their worldview. There are different ways to talk about it, their narratives. But in short, something had happened that led them, not in like a switch of a light switch on off, not immediately, but in a process incrementally, that they shifted how they thought and analyzed information. And also the being dimension, I found that these individuals had something in common. At some point, they started to ask a question like, why am I doing this? What is my mission in life? And what is my role, the larger role? What is the difference I want to make? Similar to what had happened to me. So after sitting on these many, many hours of transcripts, and there was no AI to transcribe at the time, I realized that I could pull out of that much information, things that we could actually develop. That they were not complicated to develop them. They were not immediate, and it was not necessarily a cognitive thing. It was not something to teach, but something to develop. And when I say develop, it's like we can put a prompt out there and have people seek the answer. And that is a very powerful way to transform our way of making meaning. When we start looking for the answers, and we look on the answers inside, outside, we start to look for them. It's a very engaged way of learning. So as a result, I came up with a number of elements that related basically to systems thinking. There were 4 aspects that I found within that fall into the systems thinking category. Now there are many sustainability lists of competencies that talk about systems thinking, so you are familiar with them. And but also I found that there were some paths to develop what I call the ecological worldview. The ecological worldview is a way to look into the world that considers the ecosystem. Ecological, not just for the natural environment, but also including humans, including the social aspects, because all this is like from the Greek word oikos, our house. So how can we have this big house in mind when we are analyzing information? And then there were 2 more areas where I found aspects that can be developed. Some fell in the emotional intelligence and spiritual intelligence. Spiritual intelligence, particularly related to what are our priorities, our values, our sense of purpose. How do we see ourselves with relation to nature. Very important, because there is an experience of oneness with nature that is different than understanding biology, for example. So, so there were these different aspects, but all in all, there are 12. And as I always say, there may be other ways to develop a mindset. These are just the 12 that I found, and that over the past 15 years or so, I have been using, and many others have been bringing into their teaching or different disciplines. Well, what happened there is that I said, okay, if I found this path, these shortcuts to develop a mindset, let's do it. And I designed a course. And that was a way to pilot it. And I taught it in the School of Hospitality and Tourism in New Jersey, in the US. And that was sort of my learning in action, because I had the theory, I think this should work, but until I didn't do it, I really didn't know. And I was amazed at the responses, the reactions, the transformation, the experience of the students that went far beyond what I imagined could happen. It was so powerful how they started to rethink and develop more self-awareness about which were the ways in which they were contributing to the problems, where they were part of the problems. And interestingly, as they were getting more into noticing their automatic habits of behaviors of thinking, they also felt that it was not so difficult to shift. It was like expanding consciousness, and this became a new filter through which they saw the reality. And I give you an example. There was a woman who said, we were talking about consumption, and this woman said, well, you know, I realize that every time I'm depressed, I go and buy some pair of shoes. And after we had this conversation the other day in class, I went to my closet and I looked at all these shoes, and they were like monuments to my depressed moments. And I said, well, yes, I don't know that it works, but in addition, how am I part of a trend that says that by consuming more this or that, you will feel better? And suddenly she said, well, it not only helped her to think this behavior, but also made her rethink how she looked at advertisements, how she looked at marketing messages, how she looked at ads in the news. It changed, and she couldn't go back to how she saw it before. And that had an impact not only on her decisions, on her daily behaviors, but also she started to talk to her closest circle, to her roommate, to her family. I say, you know, like, how come you don't see it like that? And started conversation with ripple effects. We don't know how far that goes. So I was just amazed by what was happening. And so I continued teaching for several years. And then one day, a colleague, some of us may know him, James Stoner, he was at Fordham Business School in New York. He said, Isabel, because I was teaching at Fordham at that time, he said, Isabel, what you're doing, is this working because of you or because of what it is? And that was an interesting question. I said, well, I hope it's because what the it is, but I don't know, because I'm the only one doing it. So that's when I decided to talk to a group of colleagues that I had met over the years, and we were exchanging informally, and they were interested in this. And I said, well, maybe if we get together and we form a community of practice where we can leverage our resources and expand awareness, and we will be accelerating change, because now it's not just me, others, and we're sort of feeding and nurturing each other with ideas, with resources, and we can partner, do things together. So that was the start, and I called it Leap, and it was like a game of like a trick, because Leap, the concept of leaping forward and accelerating our transformation when we go through these inner aspects, as opposed to just go with the cognitive, with the knowledge base. At the same time, it was a nice acronym for this idea of leveraging resources, expanding awareness, accelerating the change and partnering. So we started, okay, let's meet and online, because people were, one was in Australia, the other in Indonesia, a few in the US. And so we started. And then after some, and they said, can I invite someone else? Because they were teaching different courses. Some were into ethics, the other were doing marketing and leadership. So they say, oh, can I invite a colleague? He's teaching finance, but he's curious about it. Oh, yeah. So they started to invite others just to see. Well, it was a very informal network. And then at some point, I realized that Prime had this structure of the working groups. And I thought that would give a nice brand to this group, because if just by being members of LEAP, people wouldn't get any funds from their school, any recognition to go to a conference and meet. So by being part of Prime as a working group, they said, well, you know, we are part of Prime, and it just helped. So fast forward, today there are over 310, 315, something like that, and in 58 countries. And the realities are very different because of their context. Someone in Sri Lanka teaching at Colombo University has a different reality than someone in Finland, or someone in Mexico, or in South Africa. So by coming together, people connect because of the discipline. Oh, you're also supply chain management. I also am interested in sustainable supply chains. And so they start to partner and do things together. Others by geography, like it happened in this group, and we have some wonderful examples about that. Or just by affinity, because they get to know each other and like, and or they do visiting virtually their classes and come in to do something. Like one of the things that I tried to foster, which I don't think it happens sufficiently, but it's a permanent goal, is how to keep it decentralized and simple. Because the moment when you structure things, they they become obligations, and then people say, well, you know, I have other things. Just keep it where people can connect when they can to do what they feel is relevant for them in this moment of their career, their profession, their life, or whatever. So they contribute just by this inner motivation that they have. I really like this, I will do it. So by decentralizing, I mean that we have a platform where anyone can post. And so within this group, right? And so people can post resources, ask questions, or tell something about what they are doing, or invite someone. Is someone going to be, I will be traveling. There's a professor from Indonesia that came to Mexico, and she said, who is there? And so I said, oh, yes, we would like to meet with you. You know, these things happen in a network where people feel that they can connect because they share a passion and interest of developing these inner dimensions. And then also from many different disciplines. I saw that there's someone from health and society, entrepreneurship, marketing, innovation. There are people also from the arts, not only business schools, people that are into accounting, finance, strategy, but also a few from architecture, for example, and law. So I think that is just a rich tapestry that many times challenges our paradigms and makes us expand our perspective. And I just celebrate initiatives like yours, Karen. You are such an ambassador, because the way that I think we are creating ripple effects is by someone taking a part and taking it in your own journey, where you go, and building upon it and transforming and reinventing and applying and recreating. That is, I think, where we really will see that this is a movement. What it has in common, all these different initiatives, that we're paying attention to the inner aspects, be it individual or collective. Collective, the worldview that we share among everybody and we just don't question, like a fish in the water, or individual, like our sense of purpose, our personal values, what is the difference we want to make. And when we connect with these aspects, we get a profound, we reach the heart, we reach the soul, we reach the best that people have to give, which is something that many times is left out of a higher education. No? We just cater to the head, or now, well, let's do some projects to the hands. But it's like between the head and the hand, there's a connection here, and there's a lot of fuel when we engage the emotions. And you will hear it more from the stories of Orla and Barbara and Emma if she's here too. Let me pause. I've been sort of monologuing here, and Karin, Barbara, Ola, if you have some, would like to add some perspectives or bring some more color to what I said, or some context, or
Yes, and very much inviting everyone from the floor here to make the most of this section before Isabel will need to leave. And I'd just like to jump in there because I love what you're saying over all of us being able to disseminate and transform through our own adaptation, perhaps, of the sustainability mindset principles. And I think that some things that's immensely beneficial is that this is something that our students are taking into the world of work with them, and how that understanding, going back to your original research of what's distinguishing these leaders from doing something that they're not being asked to do, is so highly relevant to the challenges that are still happening in workplaces today. Because even where you've got sustainability leaders, they need to be able to engage, influence everybody else in the workforce to get on board with the sustainability agenda. And that's a tough space for them to be in. So having an understanding of the sustainability mindset principles is obviously transformative in workplaces also. And perhaps you might like to just touch on, therefore, the work that you do around coaches with that this is something that's far beyond the space of just education.
Yeah, well, that was an interesting movement in the spiral, because one time I got this question, oh, this is so interesting, and you're teaching this, or there are professors that are bringing it into their classes, but what happens in corporations? Because these are the leaders that are making the decisions today. I understand that students will be making decisions tomorrow, but what about those that are doing it today? How can they develop the mindset? Does it work for them? And it just made me pause and say, wait a moment. And then I said, well, where did this all come from? Because it all came originally from business leaders. So if this came from business leaders, it should be natural that business leaders can learn, develop, or bring it to their own context. So we started to pay a little bit more attention to that. And I know, Karen, you have been doing it, trying to connect with the business community, other colleagues too. We have some colleagues that work in the area of finance as consultants. And then I said, well, maybe we need to develop a training for facilitators, for OD people, for OD professionals, for leadership and talent development professionals, for coaches, because it's a different audience. They don't have a captive audience. Well, they have it once, and then if they are not doing a good work, they are not hired again. While an educator, you have very much a captive audience, and the students will try to please you. So it is different what type of activities, interventions people can do when they are in a corporate setting to prompt a revision and in a more insightful perspectives about their own values, purpose, or their thinking, no? Analyze the automatic habits of thinking. So that is when, yes, we designed a training for people that are in corporation, working as facilitators, as coaches, or as external coaches, internal coaches, and learning with them because they know a lot about what are the constraints of the settings, what are the questions that they will be asked. The so what becomes very important. Why should I do it? So what? What will this bring me? What will be the impacts that I can see? And that is the interesting thing. The mindset, we don't see the mindset, but we see it in action. Once someone is acting, we can recognize, oh, this is a person that is having a non-dual perspective. He's thinking in terms of both and. Oh, how interesting. And very challenging in these times, in a very polarized world. I think this both and is one of our big cultural challenges in this time. So welcome to work on this area because the little steps that we can do can go a long way. Just unmute yourself, Orla.
I was just saying, hi, Isabel. I was just saying, yeah, one of my concerns is that we'll teach sustainability and sustainable development from a technical point only, but that won't reach into making transformational change, which needs to come out from that inner, those inner motivations, values, and passions, because that's what will be resurrective into the future. That's what will build an inspiring future, as opposed to be coming out of the problem, mindset into something that's much more transformational, which I think is much more true to where we need to go with this than simply, addressing carbon emissions, for example. There's much more to it.
It's a both and, but we are very good now at developing technical competencies and benchmarks on what is going on in innovation and technology, helping students be at the top of that curve and know what's going on, know where to find information, how to measure emissions. So all these things, we are doing a good job. We are not so much doing a good job yet in the mainstream, addressing what is the thinking that got us here. Because as long as we don't address that, we will continue unintentionally doing this harm. No? And I always say that maybe 95% of our contributions to unsustainability are unintentional. It's not that we are horrible people trying to do evil and ruin the planet for us and all the next generation. No, we are good people, most of us, right? So how can we then operate on this 90% of our unintentionality and make it intentional? And what is that we want to choose? So that is with awareness. There are a few hands raised, and I want to check a message because I asked my colleague if she could take on my first half hour in the class. So let me switch on for a moment. If you can address that question of Hazel, I will be back in a moment, okay?
Okay, Hazel, you've mentioned green
competencies, is it, Hazel?
Yeah, it is. And forgive me. I suppose I saw this event was around the mindset, and what I'm trying to get my head around. It's a bit like so. I'm part of Enterprise Educators UK, and you've got the Entrecom competencies, and to me, it comes down to: is it about teaching business startup, or is it about the mindset? And it's the same when we talk about sustainability, and this is where I think it gets really confusing. So is this group about talking about sharing the knowledge around sustainability, or is it around the competencies? Because there is a very, we hosted an EE UK educators event a couple of years ago, and we had a professor of sustainability and Andy Peñalina from Enterprise Educators UK. And what they did was, when you looked at the competencies of the Entrecom and you looked at the competencies of the Greencom, they're actually very close. So when people say to me mindset, I'm thinking it's much more about the pedagogy rather than the actual knowledge. And I think it gets a bit confusing. What we have done at Salford is we've accredited our own carbon literacy qualification, and we've embedded that into all our PGT courses. But for me, it's just, I suppose it's clarification. What is the definition of the sustainability mindset? So is it the skills associated, or is it the knowledge? And I think that's where I'm struggling with.
Okay, I think I can start, and then I would like, Karen, who you have done such a work on connecting it with the comp, that you can give the down to earth about that. I can share a slide. If you see my screen right now, do you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. It is maybe the previous one. It is a particular way of thinking and being that has an impact on our decisions, on our behaviors. And it is, right now we have these 12 principles that fall into the 4 categories for content areas. And when I think this is another graph that may help you. There are the internal and external column in this matrix in the individual and collective. And most of our focus in higher education is on the external column. That means that at the individual level, we want to work on competencies. What can they do? We want to work on their behaviors. We also want to tell them what leaders are doing, what are initiatives. It's at the individual level. And at the collective, we like students to know about regulations, innovation, solution programs, institutions, etc. This is the external area. Here in the mindset, we work with the left column, which is the internal. That means at the individual level is what are my personal values? What are my beliefs, assumptions? What is my purpose? What questions do I ask about my purpose? On what values am I anchoring my identity? This is very important because this is the automatic part that we will see in the behaviors, but this is conditioning, this is setting up the type of behaviors that we will be seeing. And at the collective, which are the collective assumptions, worldviews, or causes. So if there would be a way to compare it, it is the inner dimension. If for those that are familiar with the inner development goals, some of these goals, although many of these goals are actually skills, so it is not quite in that a total overlap. But it is the internal aspects. We will see the mindset in action. We will see it when it becomes external. So we will see it in the competencies, we will see it in the skills, but we will be questioning at a deeper level. Why are you doing this? What thinking did generate this action? Karen, maybe if you want to share about your work with the comps. You're muted, Hazel and Karen.
I think Orla might come in here more, but my overall perspective on this is that the sustainability mindset principles offer a 12-step framework. So the IDGs have really taken off. Everyone's hearing about those, and that's great because it's good within education and it's very much been absorbed by the business community and it's growing rapidly. So it's again showing the value of all of this. But there's around 24 different aspects that are involved, and the sustainability mindset principles are based in research. They are developed through PhD level thinking and rooting. So those dimensions of learning, cognitive, knowledge, behavioral skills, and mostly emotional, affective-based dimensions of learning are deeply connected to each three of those principles. So they offer a consolidated, robust framework, in my mind, that is much easier to work with than many others because it's language that we can understand, students can understand. Orla, did you want to say something?
In the masters, I'll explain how we embedded it, but in simple terms, Hazel, it's like with the students who are business leaders and full-time, I said, look, we're going to focus on the inner development side of this, and also all that you need to be able to embed sustainability across your business. So, and that really came through when we did the work, and it came out from the people themselves in terms of the recognition of the need for a new consciousness, connecting into their own why, which goes back into their values. And I'll share some of that when I'm kind of showing the masters, because it's there.
No, thank you. It was just really useful to see the angle that you were coming at, because I'm very involved in enterprise educators, and I've been in leading on some of the sustainability aspects within the school, and yeah, it was really good to hear, and quite happy to share what we've integrated into our programs if anybody's interested later.
Well, I think this is a good segue, perhaps you mentioning enterprise educators, for us to move into the presentation mode where you'll hear from Barbara and Orla in the application of the principles to their enterprise educators funded project. Just before we move into that, one more question, Amma Bryn.
Yes, thank you, Karen, and thank you, Isabel, about talking about this mindset thing and internal dimensions. I've recently started engaging with IDGs, and I do agree with you. This is just a comment about operationalizations of it. So when you talk about mindset and coming from the research perspective, that makes very easy to embed all of these aspects as well. So thank you for pointing to that direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Barbara, are you able to share it? Brilliant news, Isabel. Fantastic. Because we're clearly people just joining also and about to go into another learning spectacular. Here we go. Are you speaking, Barbara? You're muted.
Apologies and thank you. Yeah, so thanks for adding me to this session. So I'm going to talk specifically about how we apply the sustainable mindset principles to enterprise education. So it's a good lead to what Hazel was saying. So the people that you see on the right column are all the lecturers that were involved in this project that was funded by Enterprise Educators UK, including Karen and Chris Moon, who is also in the audience today. I'm myself, I'm a senior lecturer in the University of Derby. I've been involved in Prime in this working group as part of working with Orla on a massively responsible business. So basically one of the key outcomes was actually taking the bull by the horn and creating something specific. So we wanted a toolkit of ways to apply the principle in practice to the enterprise education discipline in particular, because I resonate with what Ace was saying, that there is so many overlaps with Green Comp and Entracomp. So there is a natural overlap between enterprise education and the sustainability principles, because we need innovativeness and creativity to find solutions to achieve sustainable change. So that was kind of like the starting point of the group that was behind the initial bid that got to this project. We are all also Enactus advisor. So we felt that particularly within business school, the practice of working on something specific can make it much more meaningful for students to understand what sustainable development actually means in practice. So obviously also from a higher education perspective, there are many calls for education for in embedding the principle of ESG, which have been around for 30 years, to be embedded much more explicitly within the curriculum. So QAA, subject matter for business management, and obviously enterprise and entrepreneurship education guidelines. So something quickly about the project. So again, funded by Enterprise Educators UK, which is very much practice-based. So we felt it was a really nice community to be part of, and really focus on enterprise education in particular, which naturally, as we said, have this kind of like can be a good conduit of many of the behaviors that we need in global citizenship for sustainable development. If we think about SDG 4, for example, and naturally we chose the sustainable mindset principle as a framework. So many of the comments of Karen were part of the discussion that we have in the early stages of designing the toolkit. In terms of what we wanted to do with the project was to enhance sustainability competency. So going back to what Hazel was saying, what does it do? The final outcome should be not just tapping into knowledge, tapping into values, and also hopefully naturally also to enhance the sustainability competencies by being explicit about the principles embedded in the teaching. We particularly pivoted on active learning, which we found is essential for transformative education. So we really focus on active learning tools, and fundamentally, so as in line with what we said earlier, we wanted to move beyond what is sustainable development, what does it do, what are the things, to fostering a motivational aspect within students, which should hopefully lead to transformation and making them actors of change in sustainable development. When I normally present the project, I obviously talk about sustainable mindset, but Isabel, thank you for doing it so compellingly as you invented this framework. So in terms of our own way to position this project, we start from enterprise education frameworks, which actually aspire to develop enterprise awareness, developing an entrepreneurial mindset, capabilities, and entrepreneurial effectiveness. And we overlaid the principles of sustainable
Barbara,
mindset.
just to interrupt, the slides are not moving on or full screen. I don't know if you have moved on.
I am actually. Maybe it was because I moved them quickly, and
no,
then it didn't.
Nothing's full screen. It's all we're saying is the first slide not full screen.
Not sure why this is happening. Shall I jump out of the? That's so weird. Sorry.
Yeah, try sharing it again.
Let me just give it a try. Why?
And just making it on slideshow as well, Barbara. That might help.
Yeah, I was doing that actually. It's like completely strange. So let me try once again. On sharing this. There we go. Share, and then can you see it?
Not the slides yet. We're just on your Zoom page.
Sorry, I hope you're able to see it now.
No, we're seeing all sorts of strange things. Orla, how about you? Because you've got the whole deck, haven't you? Maybe Orla has a go.
Yeah, I really don't know what's happening. Sorry. I have no idea. Anyway, so maybe while Orla, I'm also conscious of time, and so I can just while Orla starts.
You stop sharing, Barbara. There we go.
So Orla can go ahead. I'll just talk through the remaining slides. So fundamentally, the project was aimed at producing enterprise education tools that could be used in the context of enterprise education. So the tool that Orla will present now focus on spiritual intelligence is one of those that were selected for a toolkit. And also we try to find to obviously tailor different tools that could be used and tap into elements of enterprise education frameworks and element of the sustainable mindset. So yeah, do you want to move forward a couple of slides? So I'm going to go to the next one. Yeah, so this was the one. So we kind of reflected on what were the enterprise education framework, which actually talk about obviously developing entrepreneurship awareness and competencies and capabilities and developing entrepreneurial effectiveness. And we try to basically generate a series of, well, some were generated and some were actually selected and were already existing in the, it came out of our literature review. So I'll, moving on, sorry, thanks, Orla. So yeah, so the literature review, we can skip this, was quite comprehensive. So part of the outcome of the project was a workshop. We used active action research through a workshop with enterprise educators to test some of the tools. And so we ran it on site, and also we offered an online version. Moving on. So this is some of the depiction of the workshop. Again, really much about active learning. And if you can move on. And this is one of the tools, one of the examples. So this tool particularly aligned with the system perspective. It's in the format of the tools that, for those that are familiar with enterprise education, UK are available and kind of provide ready to go active learning experiences that can be used to tap into, as we said, enterprise education framework skills, but we also highlighted where within the sustainable mindset the tool would be useful. So, for example, leading responsibly, it's a simulation that can be presented to a class to experience firsthand what it means to engage with stakeholder and come up with trade-off decision when leading responsibly. So again, this taps into the system perspective or long-term thinking and interconnections, and also both and thinking, because obviously trade-offs has to be negotiated. So this is one example. Moving on. Another one that was quite successful. So this is a kind of some screenshot for the simulation, because a specific software is suggested, but obviously there are many software for simulation of responsible management decisions. So that was quite interesting. The next one was also tested during the workshop and was very useful because it's a methodology for participatory decision making. So again, it can help developing in terms of competencies, ideas and decisions, which taps into being enterprising. But in terms of the ecological of the sustainable mindset, this is very useful because it helps participants to tap into what is my contribution to sustainable change and sustainable development. Because often, as we heard earlier, we focus on the knowledge, the eco-literacy. You know, we all have carbon literacy and knowledge curriculum, but how do we reflect on our own contribution to change, and specifically how can we instill that in students? So In the next slide, we just briefly we show how the question that we posed to the enterprise educators that came to the workshop, and also we tested it in the classroom. So we asked questions such as, how do you think enterprise education should change for achieving a sustainable society? So collectively, the room of 30 enterprise educators came out with ideas on how to adapt the enterprise education curriculum, and that can be done in any context. So in the classroom, often when we often give ideas and then it ends there. So we want to prompt action, and that this tool does exactly that. So now I'm going to pass on to Orla, because her tool was also featured in the toolkit. Also, spoiler alert, 2 tools were coming from Karen. So very useful, your contribution, Karen, as well. And in the slides, you will also find a QR code. So when you receive them, if you're interested in getting involved, because now we want to test in the classroom all these tools, and we now are soliciting more funding to bring on the project. So any of you in the audience, if you want to get involved, just get in touch. And thank you for having us today. Thank you.
So there's a QR code to get involved. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, great. And some references from Barbara.
Great.
Yeah.
There we go, Orla. So you can move on then to yours.
Shall I pick it up from there?
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'll pick it up from there. Okay. So this was one of the workshops on the day that the session that Barbara organized. So I'm going to show some excerpts from that, but I'm also going to show how we have embedded the sustainable mindset in a master's that we run. But the specific focus for today will be around this aspect that we need to tune into more than just the cognitive. And we know from the ESD pedagogy that we need to tune into the being, the doing, and the thinking, but the being is often the part, particularly in higher education, that gets left out. So I'm going to do a little bit about how we approach that with the masters that we run here at the University of Derby in the college. So Isabel kindly went through the whole evolution of this framework, and we've embedded the framework through the whole of the masters, you'll see in a moment. But I was particularly interested in how do we tune into something in the correct, reverent way to something as significant and important as spiritual intelligence. You know, in higher education, it's not something you tend to do unless you're doing theology or something, you know. So, and the masters that we developed was for business leaders. They all are working in, you know, large national and international corporations. So they were our first pilot group for this. We're now running it with full-time students. So these are just the modules you'll see. I'm not going to run through them. You can read them there for yourself. But the yellow and the green just highlight where we had a natural alignment to the sustainable mindset framework. Now, in the masters, we've embedded the SDGs, we've embedded climate fresh carbon free certification, we've embedded in each module the UNESCO sustainability competencies, which was all great. But the bit that I felt was going to be very important was the sustainable mindset model, and we put it in our module, in our program spec, as being the part of the program that deals with the inner development work. So you can see here, you know, we start that work off in the first module. When we look at the strategy module, we look at this aspect of values, both from a business perspective, a strategy perspective, but also from, as business leaders, what are the values they would want to see play out in their organizations. That was picked up then in the leadership module, and we interviewed 2 very leading sustainability leaders from business perspective, and it was really reinforcing how they were coming out from their own personal values and the work the students did on unpicking that link to those values and a different kind of consciousness. And then we try and underpin that in each of the modules that we run through. We also did the SMI diagnostic to look at the mindset of the cohort at the start of the program, and we'll do that at the end. But one of the things that came out very naturally from not just from the teaching, but from the students, the business leaders themselves, was the fact that we did really need a new level of consciousness. But the question is, how do you reach into that? Yeah, you can't solve the problem from the level of the problem that was created, but then how do you actually access the new level of mind and the new level of values? So that was a question we were able to kind of discuss together. And the Barrett's 7 levels of consciousness was another lovely framework to help surface that, in the sense of how do we go from survival needs and up to this point of being able to move beyond the profit only motive into the kind of higher level motives that we are looking to achieve through sustainable development, which you can see here. And there's quite a natural kind of development that goes with that. So a lot of really good discussions around this kind of evolution. And we were lucky enough to have Isabel in to give a talk. And one of the things that the students really came away with, and these are like senior technical directors, supply chain managers, sustainability leaders, but what really resonated was, what's your why? Yeah, what's your why? And we started to look at, the values of our higher self. So how do you even present the concept of a higher self? Well, we first started to look at what are values, and there's some, references there that you can use to kind of look at that. But you can see here, even just with the blue writing, that it's something that comes from the inner part of you. It's to do with those higher soul, spiritual level aspects, and it's to do with authentic growth values. So one of the definitions we chose to have around values were values are what you wish to stand for. And the thing about values is, if you've ever worked on your own values, there's something that resides, if you've not made conscious decisions, they reside in the semi and unconscious part of yourself. So as Isabel's saying, this isn't something you can teach, but it is more about creating an ecology in which by you can create the safety for those to surface. And yes, you can influence but through education, but ultimately values is sovereignty of choice. The values you choose as a person is who you become. So it's a very important thing to kind of approach with reverence, is what I would say. So Albert Einstein is one of my favorite guys, and we used him a lot during the program, but what he touches on there is the difference between the kind of rational mind, or the brain, or the cognitive learning, is actually, believe it or not, only a small part of our actual mind. Our mind draws from the whole person, their whole experience, their deeper wisdoms, their deeper values, their soul, their spirit. The mind draws from that, whereas the brain draws on what you have learned. And that's quite a big difference, particularly we're going to be moving into times where we're going to be dealing with more unknown. So we may not have the solutions from the past. We have to open up into new solutions. So the intuitive mind is something to really, that being side really is a very important one to bear in mind. It's the new dimension that we, in a way, need to make, I think, new space for in higher education. So one of the ways to approach that is more of a meditative or contemplative approach. And in the masters, you can see we surrounded it from many different approaches, and that's correct, because you cannot make change from one angle. But as an example, this is showing one example. We did a kind of a meditative process to help to just give people the chance, the space actually, to begin to reflect on, well, what would my higher self be able to say? And again, to make it more accessible, we said the higher self is the more illumined, wiser part of you, because we all know from our own experiences, there is always a voice in you. It's more subtle and more quiet, but it can prompt you and guide you if you listen to it. So I'm just going to show you these and just we're almost there at the end, Karen, so we'll have time. We just this is one of the things we did in the workshop. I did a more involved process with my own students, but even just giving ourselves the chance to think about what is our relationship with this beautiful planet. Can we think about it as her home? And what are the sentiments, the qualities, the attitudes that we wish to have? And that might sound very simple, but on other hands, it's probably the first time people have had to make conscious decisions about it, which you do with sustainable development. Also, if you ask a question in a different way, like the top question asks it in more an objective way, whereas the bottom question asks, well, what does it mean for you? And that's an important distinction as well. Like, what motivates you to live more sustainably? Can you surface that in a conversation? Yeah. And you can do this kind of meditative work as individuals having that meditative time, or in small intimate groups like pairs or threes, like we did in the workshop. So when you think about it, some of the big shifts in mindsets that we have to make compared to what other generations have had to make, unless they're in indigenous tribes, is we do now need to have in our mindset of whatever we're doing now, we have to work within the lens of the understanding that we're living in a living, I believe, sentient planet where, we, from the early 2000s, we are now living on the planetary credit card. So thinking about what our stance is in relation to the planet, what are our natural sentiments, and when we do the work on nature connectedness, it's there, just beneath the surface. Everybody does have that care, but one of the important things, if we don't make clear decisions about our values, it doesn't tend to translate into action. This is an example of from the more kind of in-depth exercise we did with our students, the business leaders again. And this was from one of the students who's given me permission to share this. We did an exercise where they had a chance to connect to their higher self around these areas. And Laura, who's the student, got a message from her higher self, and the message was in the form of this image. And it's to represent that human beings, and this is her personal kind of manifesto, is that she learns and advocates in her business to live in balance and to have that care and stewardship for the planet. For others, examples from the students from the program, others have gone into really change their company strategies to embed sustainability as a core strategic value. They've rolled out carbon literacy to other organizations. They've embedded the triple bottom line where they never had that in a kind of very traditional business. So there's been real action. I couldn't be happier with the level of action, but also because, to put it in the words of the most senior person in the cohort, who's now looking at his independent study and wanting to create a sustainability roadmap for a high emission sector. And he's saying, well, this is my legacy. This is my give back before I retire. So you can see it's very values led what they do. So that's it. Thank you. And there's some references there as well if you wanted. Let me stop sharing now.
Fabulous. I very much want to open the floor, and it seems a shame to move away from that lovely space